Hey there, and welcome to the Hour of History podcast. This is your host, Stephen Bauman, and this week I'm talking education with David Kent. He has experience teaching social studies in New York City. He's taught middle school, high school students from all over the world, and he's tried to bring the world to them through his Get Lost Mr. Kent project. He has some great information for people who are interested in entering the profession, great information for people who are going through some of the trials of the profession, and some fun stories along the way. You're going to want to listen up if you're interested in history or education. It's another great conversation on the Hour of History podcast, where it's our world, anytime, any place. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Hour of History podcast, Our World.
Anytime, any place.
For show notes, links, and more, be sure to visit our website at www.hourofhistory.com. And for all the book recommendations made during the podcast, head over to hourofhistory.com/rex. That's hourofhistory.com/RECS. Without further delay, your Hour of History starts right now.
Hey, David, and welcome to Hour of History. How are you doing?
I am well, thank you. How are you, Stephen?
I'm doing very well. It's always a pleasure to have a friend on Hour of History, someone I know outside of the professional world. So this is a special episode, and I wanted to talk about education, and you know a lot about education. But before we jump into that, why don't you give us a little bit of your own background? Who are you?
I am David Kent, and you and I met about 5 or 6 years ago as we were both doing the New York City Teaching Collaborative, a teaching residency and accelerated certification program to get strong teachers or teachers into high-need school districts in New York City.
And how did you get into that was my first time that I met you, but what brought you to teaching at that point? Because isn't this teaching collaborative presumably for career changers?
I think it was for career changers and new people, but yeah, I was a career changer. What had brought me to teaching? A few things. When I had some great teachers in my life. I think, like most people, there are a few that just stuck out for me and still do stick out for me as fantastic teachers who changed my life. And so teaching was something I had always wanted to do. I started out after college working in politics on campaigns, whether it's for someone running for office or for an issue campaign or like a question on the ballot, and then got an MPA. It's a Master's in Public Administration at NYU. When I was there, I felt like I really didn't fit in. I finished the program, but all the jobs they were providing us for were these consultancy jobs or working in government, and sitting down for 8 hours a day in front of a computer sounded like a miserable existence to me, for me. Obviously, lots of people do it and they are perfectly happy and wonderful. And also a lot of people do it and they're not. So I was going to be one of those people that wasn't going to be happy doing it. And I changed to education because I thought about all those great teachers I had.
And so there was always this sort of, I guess you could say, orientation towards public service, whether it was government or your MPA or education. Was that tied to your teachers too? Why didn't you just want to go to Wall Street and make the big bucks?
I never knew what people did for work. Like, I never understood it. I don't know. My parents weren't in business. My dad's a retired physician. My mom was an archivist, retired. So they weren't in business. They didn't work for-profit entities. So it was just it wasn't something that I even thought about.
It's interesting too. I had that thought, strangely enough, when I was serving on jury duty. I was like, I didn't know that these, whatever they were, trial attorneys or whatever, I was like, that's never what I pictured that job to be. And I wonder, maybe we'll talk more about that when we talk about what's actually taught in the classroom. But that seems like an informative thing that would be useful.
Yeah, knowing what a day-to-day what day-to-day life is like when you're working.
Yeah, or just like what the opportunities are. I mean, touring different industries or whatever. So you come through all these various jobs, and you landed in education. And so, what was that like? If someone is trying to become a teacher, what does that
Mhm.
starting process look like?
How do you actually do it?
Mm-hmm.
For me, and for you, we looked at New York City. We applied to New York City Teaching Collaborative, where it starts in the middle of the school year, and they put you into a classroom as a assistant teacher, a student teacher, essentially, from January to June, where you're gradually taking on more responsibility. Um, the application process, I don't really remember much about it. An essay here, an essay there, short answer, and then an interview, phone interview, then an in-person interview, something like that. I think it's pretty similar to most other teaching residency programs, whether it's Teach for America or New York City Teaching Fellows. But what seemed to set the collaborative apart, for me at least, was that they didn't just throw you in a classroom right away,
Hmm.
which was nice. They
And
put you in a classroom, but you were there with a full teacher.
uh-huh. And was that what attracted you to the collaborative rather than say, I mean, you already had a master's, but rather than say going to a traditional school of education and then doing student teaching as they would in the traditional setting?
Yeah, I wasn't going to go to another 2 years or 3 years of graduate school just to start working again. I wanted to start working right away.
And so that's an interesting start. I think a lot of people are attracted to these alternative programs, and they certainly have them in cities all over the United States. Had you applied to any other ones like the ones you mentioned, like Teaching Fellows or Teach for America?
Yeah, I had applied to Teaching Fellows a couple times, and then I also applied when I was living in Boston. I applied to the Boston Teacher Residency, and then the same year that I applied to the Teaching Collaborative, I applied to a residency in Denver. I got into the one in Denver, but I think that one, it was a full year of barely being paid, and in the New York City Teaching Collaborative, it was just like 6 or 8 months of barely being paid. So
I think it's funny. Yeah, that was definitely one of the draws for me was the short teaching residency period where you learned under a teacher, but you were in pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did that go?
The teacher residency?
Yeah. What was that like?
I found out very quickly that my idea of a good education did not mesh with what most people in, as we say, urban education see as a good education. I wish I had realized right then that, hey, I'm not gonna be seen as doing the right thing philosophically wherever I go if I stay in this niche, in this field. It took me a long time to realize, it wasn't that I was making mistakes. It was that what I saw as a good education, trying to do what my teachers did for me, was not considered the right way to teach. And I found that out very early.
Like when you started in this sort of apprenticeship.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, the apprenticeship is kind of strange, especially for people who have a little bit of experience, right? Because you're working directly under someone else, but the qualifications aren't always there. I know for me, it worked out really well. I was teaching with someone who had also recently taught in China, and so we had a lot of common in that way, and our education philosophies matched up. Can you explain a little bit what is your education philosophy, or at least what was guiding your education philosophy? What were those things that those teachers did in your history that made you like and appreciate them so much?
And also, just to go back a step, you
Mm-hmm.
had a teacher that you said, your mentor teacher worked out well. My mentor teacher, nice enough guy, but he would tell me the exact opposite of what the collaborative would tell me. And then I'm trying to do one thing to please him and another thing to please them, and it was a mess. And as you said, like, even for someone with experience, I already had a master's degree. I had already been working for 5, 6, 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be put in this position where you're a total peon is a bad way to run an operation. But here I am. I survived. So what is my view of a good education? I don't think I can get into it without comparing it to what I found in urban education, as we so politely call it, or inner city education, or education in high needs district, or low resource community. Mm-hmm. And that is, it seems to me that there is this view that these children are so depraved that they don't need to learn first. They need their characters built first. And that has to be done explicitly and almost to the exclusion of education. Now, certainly, we all need character development. But I think that comes through education. I think that comes through being challenged in whatever you are doing. And when I would try to teach content, content became a 4-letter word almost. And so a focus on content instead of becoming almost like best friends with the students was, to me, just a terrible way to go about teaching. And my teachers weren't friends with me. And you know what? I had a few that tried to be friends with us, and they were not effective teachers.
Interesting. So those teachers that were effective teachers, who weren't friends, what was the sort of, what were they then?
They were...
What were they like?
They weren't like mean to us or cold with us, but they were certainly they were not there to form these relationships with us that their supervisors thought would change our lives.
Can you give me some examples of these, like this sort of like builds character first rather than content? No, like it not necessarily specific. It can be in the abstract, but what were the sorts of things that were expected of students or were expected of teachers to do with students?
What was it? Just the idea that if you run, I don't know if I'm answering that question, but I'll try. I ran my class in a business-like manner. And I was not always the warmest or like the cool uncle.
Right.
That wasn't my role. That's not what I can do well. And that's not what I wanted to do as a teacher anyway. And that was seen as, as my being a poor teacher. What, exact examples or specific examples. And that's the thing also, I never really got specific things to do from supervisors. Right? They would say, your class has to be warmer. Okay, how do I make my class warmer? Someone please tell me. Because if you can't tell me, then what are you talking about? Then it's just your perception of my classroom, not my kids' perception of my classroom. And I found a lot of teachers in low-income, high-needs communities, urban education. Our schools were 99% Black and Latino, 99% free or reduced lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people get into teaching to help these kids who are the worst off in society. And certainly they have a lot of issues and a lot of obstacles to their success. But for every student, I'll call him Justin, for every Justin who's screaming at you or throwing stuff across the room or sleeping through class and cursing at you if you ask him to pick his head up and not letting you teach, there's also Sarah and Anaya and Jose, who should, just on the merits of their academic abilities, go to top tier colleges for free. And the focus is always on Justin.
And whose focus is always on Justin?
Educators and administrators.
Okay.
Focus that if your classroom...
I think I just lost you for a second. Could you repeat that?
So, sorry about the internet
Yeah, no worries.
interruption. But this focus on the students who are causing chaos in a classroom, and versus the ones who are sitting there quietly, calmly, trying to learn and wanting to learn, learning despite everything that is going on around them. And people, teachers and administrators will say, well, if there's chaos in your classroom, it's the teacher's fault.
How much of this is a sort of industrial model of education problem, where you have 30 students and one teacher in a classroom? And so anytime, I mean, we talk about it in education, but if I put 30 random people into a classroom in any age, you're going to have chaos. Is it just a bad model? Or could it still work, in your opinion?
I mean, it worked. I don't know if you'll always have chaos. Will you get the best education possible? I mean, I don't think so. Although, studies about class size are mixed. The results of studies regarding class size are mixed. So I don't know if it's just the model of education. I think it's this let me quote George W. Bush, this soft bigotry of low expectations.
Oh.
That,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go on.
That we see a student creating chaos. I mean, I'm not talking about just like throwing a paper ball across the room, which certainly happens plenty of time. I'm talking about like throwing hard objects at the teacher. I'm talking about sexual harassment or physical assault, whether threatened or actual, at other students or the teacher. Things that just are not acceptable. Okay,
so most people would say, all right, you're making sense. A kid does something that's not acceptable, then get him out of there. I feel like that would be the common response. Is that sort of the reaction that happens? Like, what do you do with a student who is doing this?
In lots of schools, if you send a student out, every now and then you're okay. If you have to do it a lot, administration's going to raise an eyebrow and say, what's going on in your classroom that you have to constantly be sending kids out? Well, what's going on is you're trying to hold kids to expect some level of expectations to allow others to teach. Now, was I the best at classroom management? No, not even close. Was I the worst? No. Was their behavior my fault? No. And if you send a kid out, what happens? The student is sent to what's called a reflection room, where they're in there with a dean or some other administrator who will talk to them in some way, some form, have them write a note explaining what they did, have them reflect on what they did and say all the right things and write all the right things, but then come back to your class the next day and do the same thing.
Well, so how important, and this is obviously, all these questions are loaded questions because I've lived through this in many ways, just like you have, and like many other people have. how important is this dean character, and the dean of the school in these reflection rooms or these offices when they're sent to the office, and is it possible in your experience in schools you've been to, are there deans who can make that reflection period a significant change in the student's behavior, or does the student just come back and continue to do the same behaviors?
They come back and continue to do the same behaviors. Now, if the dean stops by your room, the student might stop messing around, but that doesn't help. That just says, I mean, that just it just cuts your legs out from under you. The dean's not trying to. Sometimes the dean is not trying to. Or another figure who does have some authority over the student and is able to prevent the student's awful behaviors from coming up. So sometimes they're there to help. Sometimes they're there to throw you under the bus. So how important is the dean? I mean, I don't know, but it's you see it from the same students every day, and what changes it is time. Just time. Just over the years, kids will change. But
so then, what is the solution for a teacher? Obviously, a teacher doesn't see that student. Well, they see them every day for less than a year. So what do you?
So what does the teacher do?
What does the teacher do? I know there's there have been alternative models. So we have public schools. The idea behind a public school is that every student in a certain district goes to that school. So you can't just send the student away, because if they live in that neighborhood, it's their right to an education, regardless of how they use that.
Right. But
So,
then
so what do you do?
I have no idea. It's a problem beyond the walls of a classroom and beyond the policies of a certain school.
And I presume that's not something that anyone within the walls of the classroom or school wants to hear.
No. When we say no, a teacher can fix all. What? How is that? How does that even make sense?
Now, tell us a little bit about the different environments in which you've taught. What grades have you taught? What subjects have you taught? Let's start there.
I'm certified to teach history or social studies. I've taught 9th grade social studies, 6th grade social studies, 10th grade social studies. Although when I taught 10th grade, it was as the special education teacher.
Okay.
I'm not certified in special education, but I was at a charter school when I was the special education teacher. And charter schools have different rules. Now, look, I can do the job of a special education teacher, so it's not the worst thing in the world that was my role. And there are plenty of people who are certified that can't do their job. So this isn't a knock on charters as being totally corrupt, because people get certified and aren't good at what they're certified in. So, but yeah, I've taught in the DOE. I've taught at a small independent charter, and I've taught at a charter that was part of a larger, well-respected network.
So just DOE for people who don't know.
Sorry. Department of Education, the public schools in New York City.
Oh, okay. And so you've taught middle school, high school, Department of Education, independent charter. What is that as opposed to a big time charter?
Well, charters, do you want me to get into?
Just very briefly, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, just a charter is an organization applies for a charter, a kind of a carve out of the law saying that they can establish and operate a school. Sometimes an organization will do just one school. They'll say, we want one campus, one school, that's it. Some that are bigger names, they might start with one school and then grow and have lots of schools, whether that's Democracy Prep or Success Academy or Achieve.
Mm-hmm. And these are big ones in New York City.
Yeah, these are big ones in New York City. and they're known for being a little more structured.
In what way?
In terms of behavior, and also in they seem to be more corporate-esque. So there's a central management office that sends out policies and oftentimes curriculum to the teachers, so that there's some sort of uniformity across campuses.
And speaking of curriculum, now you said you're certified in social studies, and what does that mean for someone teaching 6th through 10th grade and even beyond?
So I could teach 7 through 12, but in New York City, you can teach 1 year above or 1 year below your certification grade level.
And was that you were teaching social studies?
Yes, teaching social studies.
And what does that look like? What is that?
History. So for when I taught 6th graders, it actually looked a lot like the 9th grade curriculum. It's global history from ancient times to the age of exploration, although we never got that far.
That's a lot of history.
That's a whole lot of history. But yeah, it could be anything that isn't United States based.
Wow.
And anything that isn't all that modern. Just 10th grade covers the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century.
Now, it seems like at every level, and I too have taught, in middle schools and high schools and undergrad, it seems that colleagues are always saying, I don't know what they did at that previous stage, but they don't know anything. Is that a real problem? What's happening there?
I don't know. What do you mean?
Like this idea of, I expect my students to have a baseline knowledge. Was there a baseline?
Oh, so like, I don't know what my kids did at the school they were at before.
Exactly. Like sort of the passing the buck kind of thing.
Yeah. There is very little baseline knowledge, and that's one of the things I tried to focus on. I wanted my kids to know the continents and the oceans. My 9th graders didn't really know them. 9th graders didn't know the continents and the oceans.
And so were you allowed to do, how do you teach someone the continents and the oceans?
That's just basic memorization.
Right.
And that's considered, talk about content being a 4-letter word. Memorization is, you're not allowed to memorize stuff. You're not allowed to ask kids to memorize things.
And why is that?
Discover it on their own. Like, what are they going to do? Seriously, get on a boat and sail and be like, this ocean is, and then they're going to rename it because they have to create the knowledge themselves. It's crazy. So
you're not being facetious here. That's sort of like, but what do they? So what do you do then if you're not allowed to use things like memorization, and what is the teaching methodology there?
That's a really good question. I think I did a good job of having my students examine and analyze text. What does it mean to analyze text? Because every single administrator I ever had told me they got to analyze. And I would ask them, what does that mean? What does that look like? Couldn't get a straight answer. But I think I did a good job of having my kids answer questions, kind of going from more basic to like just repeating what we found in the text to a little more complicated, whether it's comparing different time periods or comparing different geographic regions or civilizations or religions. I did a lot of annotating, teaching kids what to look for when they're reading, and how to write that down, how to make notes in the margins. And so administrators liked when I did that. But I don't even know where I was going from here.
Yeah, we were talking about sort of tactics. If you can't kind of use memorization or I know there was definitely an aversion to any kind of drilling,
Right.
Which is, when I think back to my own education, I once got detention because I added an extra curl at the bottom of the cursive Y. And
don't ask students today to write in cursive.
Right. Is this just a problem of sort of losing focus of what's important, or is this a total philosophical issue? Where are these problems coming from, and how does a teacher who, like yourself, who wants to give these kids the skills and at least certain base level of knowledge, work with that?
Where is that problem coming from? I have no idea. I just have to say, like, I'll just say it again, like content, and you and I have said this off the air, like as I said earlier, content became a 4-letter word somehow. Skills became a 4-letter word, and teaching became about helping kids figure stuff out on their own, which sounds great. There's this one head of a school that I was at, and he said he wanted his 6th graders to contribute original thought and original knowledge to their field of study. That's what PhD candidates do.
Well, that's what PhD candidates try to do.
Yeah. Like, what are you talking about? So it just became student choice, student choice, student choice. And while that sounds nice, everyone gets to choose what they're passionate about. That doesn't add up to anything practical. And because if you ask students to just choose a topic that they're going to study, well, they're going to be on YouTube or Instagram, just messing around. But this idea that it's this idea, I think, that teachers don't know what they're doing. And teachers shouldn't have the responsibility, can't handle the responsibility of deciding what other people should learn.
Interesting.
Because teachers aren't smart enough. And what do teachers do anyway? They're just glorified babysitters.
Yes. So the teachers should have an expertise of some sort.
They should, yeah. But we stop being experts in our field, and they want us to be experts in these pedagogies and methodologies of teaching, which certainly there's room for that. But if teachers if teachers aren't expected to know the material, then how can they teach? And in a recent job search, I sent you this posting. There was a teaching position where you were teaching math and social studies. It was one person to teach math and social studies, and they said math content and knowledge of the math Common Core is essential. Nothing about knowing history.
And do you think that's a perception, a problem of perception that history has specifically? Why is history different in this case? And
I think it's because a lot of people don't know it and they're intimidated by it, and they see other people and if history teachers are good at it, then it makes them feel insecure.
Wow.
I'm rereading Moby Dick, and there's this great quote in there about nothing is more true, he says, in this watery world or otherwise, that when a supervisor notices someone who's superior to him that he has to supervise, it becomes his one goal to crush that person.
Wow.
So that might be some of it. It's also that history isn't tested. I don't know why history isn't tested like the other subjects, but it's not. I think because there's a lot of memorization asked of students in it, and we say, oh, we can't have our kids memorize. That just turns them into robots. Well, knowing stuff is not a bad thing. I had a great professor in college, Everett Fox, who was one of the most well-respected and well-known Torah or Bible scholars, or what Jews call the Hebrew Bible and what Christians call the Old Testament, and translators in the world today. And he talked about being forced to memorize different poems when he was a kid, and just that having those poems with him his whole life has been meaningful. And what's the matter with knowing stuff? What's the matter? Yeah, you have to memorize something to know it, but that's good. If you didn't memorize things, you wouldn't be able to read.
You know, this idea of meaningfulness too is kind of interesting. The only ways I've ever heard the necessity of music explained is we should have music in schools because it raises math and English scores.
Right.
I've never heard, besides musicians, say we should have music because it's meaningful to someone's life.
Right. Music isn't tested at the state level, so we're going to have music. That's it.
And
science is tested every few years, so they care a lot. So schools care a lot about sciences. Math and ELA, or English or language arts, are tested every single year. So those classes are the two most important.
And have you found your social studies classes changing or disappearing because of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how does that work?
Schools, I mean, there are middle schools, public middle schools, that do not offer social studies. They'll offer something called humanities, where the kids will learn a little bit about some historical figures and some historical movements. But everything is prep for the test.
Now, a little devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Couldn't you just
Tell
say...
me I'm wrong, please. I need to be convinced I'm wrong, because it is just too heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, isn't this the same thing people were saying about, when they had to study the classics and Greek and Roman history? Herodotus has been out of style for a long time now. And, finally someone said, we don't need to know about the Greek and, Peloponnesian War. Let's learn about World War I instead.
Right.
Is this not the same thing just happening? People saying, well, our students don't need to know about, say, the English Civil War anymore, or the Reformation, or any of those things. They just need to know how to read maybe one situation, and they can apply that to everything.
Yeah, I mean, there are innumerable topics to study if you're studying social studies, if you're doing history. Do you have to study what has become the canon? No, although because it is the canon, it does have importance in that you join a conversation, a national conversation, by knowing that history, by knowing certain figures that everyone else supposedly knows. But yeah, that's fine. I mean, teach whatever type of history you want, but teach them something. Because now it's just skills. And what do you mean by history skills? Please, someone tell me what they mean. And someone will say, well, the skills historians use. Okay, what are those skills?
Like read a primary source, right?
And then all of a sudden, everyone's got to do primary sources. Everyone's reading primary sources. Primary sources are fine, but there's nothing wrong with a secondary source.
In fact, historians have to start with secondary sources.
Yeah. Imagine that, starting on the bunny slope instead of the black diamond.
Yeah. So how much of an education then would you say, and now you've been around a little longer than many people have. It would be an interesting sort of thing. No, it would be extraordinary to see the numbers, because turnover, especially in alternative certification programs, is just extraordinary.
Not just alternative certification. Anywhere you go in urban education. As far as I can tell, and maybe even in independent or private schools, and maybe even in the suburb, like well-to-do suburbs, but I don't think so. But the school I was most recently at was doing a search for a new principal. And when the superintendent of that school came in and told us they had found a new principal, he said about this guy, he's been a principal for 4 years, which is extraordinary in the administration pipeline. 4 years of experience is an extraordinarily long amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
So
a lot of turnover.
yeah, so there's a lot of turnover, but you've seen a number of things, and because you've been around for a long time in this world, is it a problem of just fads, or is education just a very, it just follows the latest trend?
Right. I mean, I'd imagine everything does that.
Hmm.
Uh, there's always fads that are flashes in the pan or whatever you want to call them. And they think, oh, this new twist will solve the achievement gap. This new twist will solve racism in America. This new way of teaching will change everything. And then 5 years later, there's something new. I was getting pants tailored the other day. And, the tailor said, like, how do you want it like short? Because that's the style now, right? Like an inch or so above your ankles. And I was like, no, that's going to go out of style in a few years. It's just like the regular length, like down to my heel or whatever. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense. All right, I don't need to go, because then you got to buy new pants.
So is this then something that afflicts all industries and all, or is I don't know. I find education to be somewhat more susceptible to this.
Maybe. I'm all for hearing an argument that it is. But it just seems to be the human nature, right? Like the new shiny object.
Right. So you can't obviously bring a classroom all around the world, especially, I mean, you can certainly apply.
How else are they going to name their oceans?
To different things, exactly. But you had tried to bring a little bit of your world experience to the classroom. Can you talk a little bit about your website?
That's a fantastic segue, Stephen. I'll tell you about my website or blog. It's called Get Lost, Mr. Kent. Tried to be funny with it. I think I did. I think it worked. I think it's pretty funny. My kids like to say it. They like to say to me, "Get lost, Mr. Kent." I was a few summers ago. I was in the south of Spain and was in Cordoba and Sevilla and Toledo and seeing all these places and buildings and ideas and themes that I taught my students about. And I was like, oh, I should take pictures of that stuff and bring it back to them. And I was like, well, that's just like they're looking at pictures of it in a textbook, but we don't have textbooks, or online, right? Like, what's the difference? I was like, oh, maybe I'll take some selfies. Maybe they'll think that's funny. And so from that, I, went to all these places and took selfies and made some videos and did little write-ups of anything I found historically, geographically, culturally, edibly interesting. And I tell my kids about it. They don't really go to the blog. Every now and then one of them will do it.
And they don't like seeing the selfies?
No, with this face, how can I not? My dad always told me I had a face made for radio.
Oh, there you go. There is I had a professor who used to always say, how can I teach about China? I've never been there. I have to go to China. Is this part of the expertise problem?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I teach about places I've never been. There's a lot, I can't go back in time, so how do you keep the past? So yes and no. I mean, to a certain extent, you got to know stuff, and certainly being somewhere gives you a type of knowledge that you wouldn't get from not being there, but it doesn't give you the only knowledge. It's just this idea that that all a history teacher has to do is stand up in the room and give students stuff to read, and that's it. That's why schools are combining math teachers with history teachers, and have to have a math background.
There is this old stereotype too of the dual posting of football coach and history teacher, or football coach social studies teacher, meaning exactly that. That it just comes from the textbook, But
Right.
it puts history really in a dire position, especially like you mentioned, textbooks were one of the things to have fallen by the wayside in the past
20 years?
20 years.
Yeah.
Now textbooks are, I know when I started my teaching job, there was not one textbook or one piece of paper or one, there was
Right.
nothing. No, I mean, it was just me and a chalkboard and
Yeah.
30 students, no technology at all, not even an air conditioner. Which in New York in June gets rather unpleasant.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of the sort of challenges that a teacher faces.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the maybe we should have started with this. Why are
No,
you
you
still?
gotta, you
Why?
gotta lead with the negatives.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard it takes one negative to undo 7 positives. So we have our work cut out for us.
Right.
Why are you still doing this?
Why am I
Sounds
still?
terrible. Why don't you go do another job?
Well, I mean, I kind of am, and then I'm applying to teach at private schools. Uh,
Interesting. So why would that be a different job? How is that a different situation? And why do you still want to stick around teaching?
I mean, I love teaching. I love reading every day, learning every day. Um, I, I love it. I had, as I said at the beginning, I had incredible teachers, especially Miss Waldron. If you're out there listening, Miss Waldron, um, who changed my life, who totally turned me around, who made me who I am today.
Hmm.
Not to the exclusion of other people, friends and family, but teachers and school really stuck out. And I saw it as a way, for me to do what I loved and to hopefully have some sort of positive impact on this world. But how is it a different job? Well, it's totally different because it's not a public school, and kids who act up, like, you will get 5 or 6 or 7 of them in every class of 30 in high needs districts, unfortunately, and who just become the total focus of a classroom. Kids like that they're kicked out of private schools.
Hmm.
So, and kids know that, so that they don't behave in a manner that would otherwise get them kicked out, or that would get them kicked out. I'm not going to lie, the socioeconomic and racial makeup of private schools is generally a lot different than what you see in inner city education. And there's a different amount of faith in the system that you have from well-to-do white people.
Hmm.
And I don't blame people of color for not having faith in a system that doesn't seem to serve them. But what my skill set is, where my strengths are, it's not in teaching in the South Bronx.
Hmm.
And it took me 6 years to learn that.
But that was always where you wanted to be.
Yeah. I was raised a good liberal.
and
it's heartbreaking because I've met so many students that just really, really deserved to be the focus of an education, of a school district that would be stars anywhere they went, except for where they are now, with the administration and educational philosophy that they're stuck in now, that says it's all about fixing the kids who are worst behaved. And then if you're quiet, you're going to be ignored because you're not causing trouble. The squeaky wheel gets the grease or whatever.
And so what words of advice would you have to someone who's embarking on this daunting journey to go teach in a urban school?
Right. Do it. Absolutely do it. You might be much better at classroom management than I am. Or maybe you don't have the same neuroses that I do. Everyone's got their own neuroses, but maybe you don't have the same one that I do, where I think I'm going to get fired every day because my classroom isn't quiet enough. So do it. Just understand it is not your fault. Their behavior is the behavior of the worst few students is not your fault. And they're not bad people. The worst behaviors you see, it's not because of you. You will get better at handling them, but to this idea that a teacher can totally wipe out any type of negative or harmful behavior in a classroom is, I think is unfair to the teacher. So do it, teach wherever you want to teach. Don't lose sight of Jaden, who's sitting there quietly studying and reading. Even though he's in 9th grade, he's reading at an 11th grade level. And for him to do that, despite all the obstacles he has faced in his life, is worthy of being on the front page of the New York Times as a role model for everyone. Don't forget about him when Sarah is screaming at you and telling you she hates you. She don't really hate you. She just hates that you ask her to do a lot.
Hopefully that wasn't your suggestion, because we're getting to the...
Oh, no. Well, I don't know.
Because that sounded like a great suggestion. But
it's not the teacher's fault, and don't forget about the kids that are so often forgotten about.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm certainly going to add those, but I'm going to make you give another suggestion as well.
All right.
So let's hear it. What is your suggestion?
My suggestion is based on our conversation today.
It can be anything in the world. It doesn't have to do with teaching. It doesn't have to do with... Often people will choose a book. We've had an avocado banana milkshake, not milkshake, avocado banana shake. That was Dr. Tamir Sorek at Florida said, just eat a avocado and banana blended together and it's delicious. I still haven't tried that. My apologies, but it's on the list.
My suggestion is to read Moby Dick.
Yes.
You got to struggle through it. There are some parts of it, you're like, what on earth is going on in this book? Like, why is he talking about the taxonomy of whales? Like, isn't there a plot to this book? And there is a plot. He just goes off on tangents and tangents and tangents, but the plot is amazing. And there's some lines in there that'll just knock you on your feet or off your feet.
Talk about changes in education. I'm sure reading Moby Dick might have turned some people off literature forever.
Yeah.
But I too have read it, and I recommend it.
Yeah.
I don't know if authors would get away with that kind of page count anymore.
No.
But you think of the great works, and like Victor Hugo, he's another one who likes to go on and on and on. But they're great works now, you know. Interesting. My suggestion is also a book. It's one I actually read when I was in the teaching collaborative. It's Frank Mccourt's Teacher Man, which is interesting because a lot of the things we talked about are sort of echoed in his book. Yet his book takes place decades before you taught in New York City. It's teaching in New York City. And at one point, a student throws a sandwich at him. Mm-hmm. You throw, totally unacceptable behavior, but he knows he can't send the student out. The student will just be sent right back into the classroom.
Right back in.
So he picks up the sandwich and he starts eating it because at the time, he didn't even have enough money to buy his own lunch. And so he was going to teach them, don't waste food. I certainly remember seeing students throw their free lunch against the wall, which was hard to watch before getting a slice of pizza down at the corner store after. But at the same time, the food is terrible sometimes.
It's criminal. It's one of the many criminal aspects of our education.
One of the many criminal aspects, the price for that terrible food. But it's incredible to listen to or to read Frank Mccourt sort of describe a lot of these similar problems. And you trace the trajectory of his teaching career. He started out in what we would now call an urban school. It wasn't non-white. in the 1950s, it was Italian immigrants and Irish immigrants. But it was the same thing. It was an economically disadvantaged area, and there was nowhere else for the kids to go, or they would drop out and leave the education system. And then you follow the trajectory of his career, and he ends up teaching at one of New York's most prestigious public schools that is based on a high criteria of admission.
That's changing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No tests, because tests are
well, they're trying to change that.
Biased.
They're trying to change that right now, but it seems the trajectory of the teachers is following that same path of sort of doing your time in these difficult areas and then moving on, which doesn't say much for the difficult areas.
Right. I don't know about doing your time, but certainly, people get into jobs and they're idealistic, and then you get exhausted. And like, how many times a day can I be told I'm a terrible teacher or a terrible person? At some point, I'm exhausted, and it's like, well, I don't have the skill set to be what these kids need then.
Right. Very interesting.
And I don't agree with the administration on how they're telling me to teach. So this is not a fit for me.
Yeah. So it was a heavy conversation, but I think you bring a great deal of experience and do share a story with I think a lot of people will empathize with what you have to say here today. So I appreciate.
Please let me know. It's always uplifting.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely check it out. Get Lost, Mr. Kent. We'll links to it in show description at hourofhistory.com. And they can reach out to you. I'll have information like that. And thanks so much. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we sign off here?
Not that I can think of right now. I'm sure I'll remember it, and then we'll have to do another show.
Awesome. Yes, you're always welcome back. And remember, go teach. Do it.
Yeah, do it. It's a nice job sometimes.
All right. On Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place. So long.
Bye. Thank you for having me, Stephen.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out our recommendations page at hourofhistory.com/recs. That's hourofhistory.com/RECS. There you'll find links to the books mentioned during the podcast, and if you choose to purchase one, you'll be supporting the podcast in the process. And if you still haven't gotten your fill of the Hour of History, make sure you head over to the Hour of History blog, found at hourofhistory.com/blog, with articles being released fairly often on topics relating to those covered in the podcast as well as others. With that, we conclude this episode and hope to have you back for the next one. Take care, and again, thanks for listening to the Hour of History podcast.